Well, welcome to this video. What we're going to cover today is kind of applying decision analysis to this drafting problem, this football drafting problem. Um, the problem description appears on the screen right now. I mean, basically just to not hurt any NFL's team's feelings, we're going to focus on this fictional team called the New Jersey Plains. They've recently locked up the first pick in this year's draft. And basically what they're trying to do is they're trying to figure out, should they draft a quarterback or should they draft a defensive lineman? And the quarterback has this 75% chance of being a franchise quarterback, but also a 25% chance of being a bust. And basically on cost estimates, if they draft a quarterback and he turns out to be a franchise quarterback, basically worth $40 million to the team, more than simply drafting a defensive lineman. If the quarterback ends up being a bust, it's going to cost them $150 million. Estimates based on recovering how long it will be before they actually find a quarterback that can play for more than a handful of years on the team. So what we're kind of viewing as a baseline is the success of the defensive lineman. That the defensive lineman is a lock to play well, and therefore we're not assuming there's any risk to drafting the defensive lineman. Then basically the fans of the team, the Plains, have been kind of pressuring them to hire this draft expert. And draft expert comes at a hefty consulting fee. So what we're interested in determining is, A, what would the team do assuming they don't hire the expert? B, calculating what's called the expected value of perfect information to figure out whether or not it's even worth considering paying $15 million for the draft expert's analysis. And then if it is worth potentially paying for the expert's analysis, what is the best sequence of decisions? So we'll end up formulating a decision tree for this problem. So what we're going to start off with, though, is formulating essentially a payoff table for the problem where we do not have the option, or we know we're absolutely not going to hire the consultant. So what we have kind of over on the right in the Excel, we've started the bare bones of the payoff table. So in terms of the available decision alternatives, we can either draft the quarterback or draft the lineman. In kind of the potential states, either the quarterback's going to be a franchise quarterback or the quarterback's going to be a bust. And so what we're going to put in is our payoffs, and we're going to work in terms of millions. So we're not going to actually type out $40 million. We'll just type out 40, meaning that it's going to be 40 million. So if we draft the quarterback, and so in order to fill out the payoff table, what we need to figure out is, well, what is the value of selecting a particular decision and being in a particular state? So drafting the quarterback and having the quarterback turn out to be a franchise quarterback rewards us with $40 million. Drafting the quarterback and having him turn out to be a bust, we lose $150 million. Drafting the lineman, we're viewing this as a baseline, so costs us zero, regardless of whether or not the quarterback is a franchise quarterback or a bust. So we'll put in zeros for those payoffs, and then we'll list the probabilities of the states. So there is a 75% chance that the quarterback is going to be a franchise quarterback, a 25% chance the quarterback's going to be a bust. So what we're first going to do is just figure out, according to Bayes' rule, what the team should do, what the Plains should do, assuming they absolutely will not hire the consultant. So let's figure out what they would do without experimentation, without this expert analysis. And what we need to do is we need to basically calculate the expected payoff for each decision alternative. So our expected payoff for drafting the quarterback, we're going to get $40 million. Should they be successful, there's a 75% chance of them being successful. And then we're going to add this to the minus $150 million payoff times the probability of being a bust. So looking at the 40, that's the payoff for the being in this quarterback equal franchise state. 0.75 is the probability of being in that state, and then we're adding that to the payoff of being in the bust state times the probability that we're in the bust state. So we end up with an expected payoff of currently drafting the quarterback of minus 7.5 million. We're interested in the expected payoff or maximizing the expected payoff. So this is bad because we're losing money in terms of this payout or payoff. The lineman, since we have 0 payoffs in both states, we don't even need to calculate really the expected payoff. It's clear that it's going to be 0. So without any further experimentation, we're going to choose to draft the lineman. So we kind of know exactly what we're going to be, and we end up with a payout of 0 for this. So this is basically assuming the Plains ignore their fans, don't even consider hiring the expert. So now let's consider the Plains have listened, but then they see that $15 million fee and are a little worried that that's a little bit too much. So what we're going to first determine is what's called the expected value of perfect information. That value gives us an idea of how much we'd be willing to pay an expert should they have 100% correct classification. And clearly, if that value is less than $15 million, we are not going to hire the consultant or the expert because the expert has a less than 100% classification. So we're going to calculate, like I said, the expected value of perfect information. That's going to help us determine whether or not it's even worth considering hiring the consultant. So basically, this is this calculation involves choosing for each state what the highest payout is, because basically what we're going to know is that this perfect consultant or perfect information is going to tell us exactly what state we're in. Then we can make the best decision for that state. So our expected value of perfect information is going to be, if we are in state franchise, we're going to get a reward of $40 million. We're going to draft the quarterback if we are guaranteed that the state that quarterback's going to be franchised. And then what happens is that with 75% of the time, the quarterback is going to turn out to be a franchise quarterback. So 75% of the time, we're going to actually draft the quarterback. And then the second aspect is, well, what happens if the perfect consultant, perfect expert predicts that the quarterback's going to be bust? Then we're going to obviously draft the lineman. So we get a reward of 0 in this case, and that's going to happen 25% of the time. So again, where these payouts, where the $40 million payout is coming from, is that is the best payoff or payout given that we know we're going to be in the franchise state. And then the 0 is the best, for the 0 down here, is the best payout given that we know we're going to be in the bust state. So calculating this is, if we have a perfect consultant, they're worth $30 million to us. So we're willing to pay up to $30 million for the services of a perfect consultant. So therefore, we should consider hiring the consultant or the expert in this case. And this is because the expected value of perfect information is greater than the $15 million consulting fee for this expert. So we know we're going to at least consider hiring the expert. We need to do some more work to know whether or not we're going to actually hire the consultant. So what we're going to do now is kind of address the second part. It does make sense to consider hiring the draft expert, and we're going to create a decision tree to essentially model the sequence of decisions that would arise that the Plains will be faced with. So what we're going to start with, I have a lot of kind of black covering out the decision tree, so we can essentially do this in real time. Where we currently are is at this state A. So let me reveal the first part of the decision tree. I don't know why the B, G, H, and F appear. It's something with Excel. It won't go behind the black. But anyway, we're currently at this decision point A. And in terms of calculating the decision tree, we need to figure out A is essentially the starting point to this problem, this decision-making environment. We need to figure out, well, what is the first choice we are faced with? The first choice we are faced with is not who to draft. The first choice we're faced with is, should we hire the expert or not? So what we're going to do from A is we're going to create two branches, one for each of the decisions. So basically we're going to uncover these two blocks, uncover these two blocks, and we have a branch that we're going to hire the draft expert and a branch that we're not going to hire the draft expert. So what happens in going from A to hiring the draft expert, we reach this event node or chance node B, which some uncertain event is going to occur before we can kind of move on and face another decision. And then if we were to choose not to hire the expert, we actually end up with we're faced with another decision. So when we go from A and don't hire the expert, no uncertain event occurs. We are ready to make another decision. At this point, we're going to decide whether or not we draft the lineman or draft the quarterback. So the two branches leaving this decision node C is either draft the lineman or draft the quarterback. If we were to draft the lineman, we reach the end of our decision-making environment. We know the payout we're getting by drafting the lineman. So we end up with a payout, I'm just going to write it in this cell, of 0 if we draft the lineman. If we choose to draft the quarterback, another chance node occurs. We don't know whether quarterbacks are going to be successful or unsuccessful, so we have to have and consider branches for both of them. So if we draft the quarterback, they turn out to be a franchise quarterback, we end up having a payout of $40 million. If the quarterback ends up being a bust, we end up with a payout of minus $150 million. And we've already essentially analyzed this portion of the decision tree in terms of examining the payoff table without experimentation. So just plugging in some things associated with this part of the decision tree, the probability of the franchise quarterback, of the quarterback being franchised is 0.75. So probability is equal to 0.75 of leaving node F and going along the franchise branch. And the probability of being a bust is 0.25. And so the overall expected cost of F is what we've already calculated. It's going to be equal to minus 7.5, or equivalently taking the expected value, taking 0.75, multiplying it by 40, taking 0.25, multiplying it by minus 150. And so when we're at node C, what we are making a decision about is we are comparing the expected payout of the node F, so basically the branch leaving node C where we draft the quarterback, with the payout associated with the branch or the decision of drafting the lineman. So the payout of node C is going to be $0. So we cannot know what we're going to do in terms of hiring the draft expert yet until we analyze the situation associated with this branch. If there's a positive expected payout associated with node B, then we are going to hire the expert. So let's kind of start constructing the payout or the decision tree associated with what happens after we hire the draft expert. Well, after we hire the draft expert, there's two outcomes to the uncertain event. Basically, this node B represents, well, what does the expert predict in terms of looking at the quarterback prospect? So either the draft expert is going to predict that they're going to be a franchise quarterback, or the draft expert is going to predict that we have a bust. So let's look at each of these situations. Should the expert predict that the quarterback's going to be a franchise, we have a decision to make. We get to choose, are we going to draft the lineman or are we going to draft the quarterback? So what we can basically now do is can reveal that portion of the decision tree. It's going to look really similar to the portion the portion of the decision tree that arises after we choose not to hire the expert and are just faced with our draft choices. But a few things are going to change. The probabilities are going to change of being a franchise quarterback or a bust. And then the payouts are also going to change. If we end up choosing to draft the lineman, we lose $15 million because we had to pay the $15 million consulting fee. Should we end up drafting the franchise quarterback or drafting the quarterback and them turning out to be franchise, we end up having to pay a payout of $40 million minus $15 million. So the cost, the payout of getting drafting a franchise quarterback minus the $15 million consulting fee. And then we're in a lot of trouble if the quarterback turns out to be a bust, because now we're in the hole for $165 million cost. So we have the same, if we think about if the expert predicts a bust, we have the same set of decisions. And actually the same set of payoffs as well, in the sense that if we choose to draft the lineman, we end up with a minus $15 million. If we draft the quarterback and they turn out to be franchise, we end up with a payout of $25 million. And then we draft the quarterback and they turn out to be bust, we end up with a payout of minus $165 million. So what we need to do is we need to, for each of the decision nodes, the D and E, to know what the expected payout of B is, we need to know, well, what is the expected payout if we make decision D? If we make, or sorry, not decision D, what's the expected payout at decision D, decision node D, and what's the expected payout at decision node E? And in order to do that, we need the probabilities associated with whether or not the quarterback will be a franchise quarterback or not. And what we need to incorporate is the information that node E we've already been given the finding of the expert. So the probability, from looking at node H, the probability that the quarterback will be a franchise quarterback is conditioned on the probability that the expert predicted a bust, because the sequence of events leading to node H includes the expert predicting a bust. So what we're going to do is we're going to bring up kind of another Excel sheet to do some of these calculations. What we are given in the statement of the problem is we are given the probability that an expert will report a particular finding conditioned on a particular state. We want the opposite for the decision tree. We want the probability of a particular state conditioned on the finding of the expert. So we need to do a little bit of work. We need to calculate some joint probabilities, etc. So what I'm going to bring up is essentially a spreadsheet to do these probability calculations. And what is already in this spreadsheet is the known probabilities. So we know that the quarterback's going to be a franchise quarterback with 75% chance. We know the quarterback's going to be a bust with a 25% chance. And what we said in the expert has a 95% success rate in correctly classifying a quarterback. That means that 95% of the time that the expert will have a finding of franchise conditioned on the fact that the quarterback is actually a franchise. So we're given the probability of the finding condition on the state. So 95% accuracy rate for franchise and 95% accuracy rate for a bust. What we need, though, and kind of according to Bayes' theorem, what we need to know is we need this flip. We need to know the probability of the state conditioned on the finding. So what we're going to work through is we're going to first calculate the joint probabilities. So what's the probability that we are both in a franchise quarterback state and had a finding that is of a franchise quarterback? Well, in terms of this calculation, we multiply the probability that we're in the state by the probability of the finding conditioned on the state. So 0.75 times 0.95. It will give us the probability that we are in both state equal to franchise, finding equal to franchise. And then we can do the same thing for the busts, the state being franchise and the finding being bust. In this case, it's 0.75 times 0.05. So same basic formula, and we can do this for the bust as well. So we're multiplying the probability of being in the state bust times the probability of having the finding be franchise, so very low, and then we also will do the same thing for bust, comma bust. So the probability that we are bust times the finding being a bust. And one thing that we can do just to make sure that we've done this correct, we have to be in one of these four states. If we look at all possible state, comma, finding pairs, we have to be in one of these four. So if I sum up all of the probabilities across the pairs, they need to sum to 1. And they do, so we've made the calculations kind of make sense from a quick work perspective. We then now are at a stage where we can figure out the probability of a finding. So we need to know the probability of the finding to be able to get the probability of the state conditioned on the finding. In particular, we're going to divide the joint probability by the probability of the finding to find the conditional probabilities. So the probability of the finding of a franchise quarterback is basically we add up the probabilities of the two pairs of having the finding be franchise. So we're going to add 0.7125 to 0.0125. So we basically have a 72.5% chance of having the expert predict a franchise quarterback. And then for the bust, we're going to add up the two finding possible, the two pairs with the finding being the bust. So we have a 0.275 probability bust. Now, what we then do is we need to figure out the probability of the state conditioned on the finding. In order to do so, we end up dividing the joint probability by the probability that we have a particular finding. So basically, it's the same formula that got us this entry of taking this probability by the conditional probability, multiplying together into the joint, we're just kind of reversing it. Then we can do the same thing for the bust. So this is the 0.0375 divided by the 0.725. Sorry, I think I definitely just did that wrong. So sorry. So this is equal to the probability that our finding is our state is bust divided by the probability that our finding is franchise. So, and I mean, if we add up these two numbers, they end up adding to 1, which is what we need. So, and then we also want to do the same thing for the state conditioned on the finding, for the finding being bust. So we end up taking the finding, the state franchise comma bust, and dividing it by the finding of being a bust. And then this is equal to the bust divided by this. And this is also going to end up equaling 1, because basically once we have conditioned what the finding is, the probability of being in either of the two states should sum to 1. So what we have calculated right now is the various probabilities that become important to us. We know the probabilities of each of the findings now. We know the probabilities of the states conditioned on the findings. So we can go back and we're going to bring in some of these formulas to various points of our various cells. So what I'm just going to label, I'm going to actually replace the P equal to, or the P is equal to, if we look at this particular cell, we have predicted, the expert predicts that we have a franchise quarterback, and we are looking at, well, what's the probability of the state being franchise, given that we have already had a expert prediction of franchise? Well, this is going to be equal to 0.982 roughly. So basically this cell down here is where we're pulling it over. Because again, we're looking at the probability of the state conditioned on the expert's outcome. So we have a 0.982 for that one. And since we need to sum up, we end up with a 0.18 probability of the quarterback being bust. For this particular probability, the probability coming out of node H, the experts predicted a bust. So we end up with a prediction of the franchise quarterback being very low, ends up being a looking at this state condition on the finding. So the finding is bust. We end up with a 0.136 probability, and the probability of them being a bust is the 0.864. And then finally, also, we need the probabilities of the expert predicting franchise quarterback. They're going to predict franchise quarterback with a probability of 0.725. They're going to predict the bust with a probability of 0.275. So we have now all the probabilities that we need to do the calculations that we want. So the first thing we're going to look at is, well, what is the right course of action after we know that the expert's predicting franchise quarterback? Well, we need to figure out, well, what's the expected payout for drafting the quarterback, assuming we're in this state. So this is equal to 0.982, so the probability of the person being a franchise quarterback, times the payout of $25 million. And then we add that to the probability of the quarterback being a bust times the minus $165 million payout. So we end up with a payout of $21.58 million compared to a minus 15 payout for drafting the lineman. So our payout for node D is, we're going to draft the quarterback. We're going to get an expected payout of $21.58 million. We need to do the same process for E. It's going to be pretty clear that since our probabilities have gotten much lower for the person being franchised, we're clearly going to go with the draft lineman. But to do the same calculation, we have a 0.136 probability of getting the $25 million payout for the franchise. And then we have a 0.864 probability of getting a minus $165 million payout for the node H. So we get a very, very low payout here. Drafting the lineman, we're going to draft the lineman, and we're going to get a payout of minus $15 million. So now we're in position to figure out, well, what is the payout of node B? So put the payout of node B here. Well, we have a 0.725 probability of the expert predicting franchise quarterback. And then we get a $21.58 million expected payout. So we multiply, in order to get the expected payout of node B, take the 0.725 probability of expert predicting franchise quarterback, multiply it by the payout of the expert predicting the franchise quarterback, and add that to a 0.275 times a minus $15 million payout associated with what we would do should we end up in node E, which is where the expert predicts the bust. So we end up with an expected payout for node B of $11.5 million. So if we look, we have a higher expected payout should we hire the consultant. So for node A, we get a payout of $11.52 million, and we would hire the draft expert. And then should we hire the draft expert and they predict the franchise quarterback, the quarterback's going to be franchised, then we draft the quarterback. If the expert predicts a bust, we're going to draft the lineman. And like I said in the problem statement, either way, the fans are all going to boo, especially at the draft. So kind of a longer video. There was a lot of moving pieces. but we've kind of went through a sequence of first figure out whether or not the expected value of perfect information tells us that we should hire the consultant, and then we can and then we formulate this decision tree. And part of formulating this decision tree when we have expert analysis is that we're typically given the accuracy levels of the experts, and we need to change them. So we're given the probability of the finding, condition, and state. What we really need to run the decision tree analysis is the probabilities of the state conditioned on the findings. So we had some work. We had to use Bayes' theorem to get these calculations, those probabilities, and then we work backwards kind of in a very similar manner to what is done for any decision trees. So, all right, thank you, and I'll see you next video, or talk to you next video.